Snow boiled around them in white sprays as rounds tore through the slope. Lieutenant Cole flattened behind a jagged rock the size of a coffin, ice grinding under his chest rig. Afternoon sun bounced off the mountain faces, dazzling and cold, turning every drifting flake into a shot of light. Automatic fire raked across the open pass from above, the sound hammering the air, long, angry bursts that chewed the world into splinters. Viper 1. This is Viper Actual. Break. Troops in. Static clawed over his words. The handset spat a warbling hiss and then a tone, an ugly hum that rode under every syllable. Say again. Actual. Someone yelled nearby. Cole jammed the push-to-talk again. Throat raw. Thunder. Thunder. This is Viper Actual. Troops in contact. Grid. Nothing. No answer from Overwatch. No higher. Just that dead carrier tone, like the mountain itself was jamming them. He risked a glance over the rock. The pass was a white bowl, sloping up to ridgelines on both sides. His platoon was scattered along its curve, dark shapes in patches of stone and frozen scrub. Small puffs of snow marked where rounds struck, a staggered line walking toward the last place a man had been upright. One operator lay face down, ruck still on, crimson pooling and then disappearing into the powder as it froze. Contact. High left. A junior operator near the front, Ortiz, pressed his face to his scope, voice higher than usual but not breaking. Multiple shooters, moving along the crest. Cole saw them too, dark coats against the sky, figures moving with practiced assurance, not the clumsy rush of villagers with borrowed rifles. Machine guns on tripods. One squat shape hefting an anti-tank launcher. The enemy owned the high ground, and they knew it. Mortars started to fall. The first round landed short, a hollow thump that kicked up a column of white, followed by a crunch of fragments pattering across rock. The next landed closer, the blast slamming into Cole's chest, snow dusting his back as if the mountain had exhaled. A third fell behind the platoon, somewhere down the slope, cutting off the way they had come. Walking it in, shouted Baker, the platoon sergeant. Doc, on me. The corpsman was already moving. He low-crawled through the churned snow, one glove pressed to a tourniquet on a man's thigh as he dragged him behind a crooked boulder. The wounded operator bit down on a mouthguard and clutched at the dirt as Doc cinched the strap tighter. His leg below the knee was a ruin of shredded fabric and dark, frozen mess. Stay with me, Doc muttered. You're good, you're good. Cole forced himself to look back uphill. The enemy was sliding into place, adjusting their arcs with disciplined intent. One machine gun pivoted, its barrel tracking down the pass. The anti-tank guy, RPG, his brain corrected automatically, swung his tube onto one shoulder and pointed it toward the cluster where most of the platoon was pinned. Green smoke. Mark that gun. Baker bellowed. A canister arced up, spinning, disgorging a cloudy coil of color. Tracer rounds chased it, then stitched down toward the throwing arm that had exposed itself for half a second. The operator yanked back just in time, a round snapping rock inches from his shoulder. Cole tried the radio again, desperation pushing his words faster. Viper Overwatch. This is actual. How copy? Thunder. Thunder. Any asset. This is. Static. Then a warped fragment of voice. Then nothing. Somewhere to his right, a man screamed for his mother and then cut himself off with a sharp breath, pressing it down, getting small behind his pack. Overhead, another mortar whistled in and struck, this time directly in the shallow draw where Bravo squad had been bound to. Snow went up in a heavy geyser, then settled in a lace of dust over bodies that had been sprinting moments before. Ortiz swallowed audibly. They're walking us onto a wall, say. We stay here. We're done. I know, Cole snapped. Not because he was angry, but because that was the only way to keep his voice from shaking. The RPG team finished setting up. One man braced the launcher on a rock, the other held the spare round. They moved with the unhurried confidence of men who thought they were about to win. The gunner dropped to one knee, leaned into the tube, and aimed straight at the heart of the pinned Americans. Cole opened his mouth to scream for everyone to move, knowing they had nowhere to go. A single shot cracked through the air. It didn't sound like the rest of the gunfire. It was flatter, cleaner, a snap that cut through the automatic storms. The rock next to the RPG gunner's head burst in a spray of stone and red. The man dropped sideways, the launcher clattering off the boulder. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then another shot. The assistant gunner jerked back as if hooked, his legs folding under him. The spare round rolled away, hissing faintly as its nose dug a track into the snow. What the? Baker skinned left and right, trying to find the source. Who's firing that? On the ridge line, confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. A squad leader at the far end of the line turned to shout at someone, arm raised. He snapped backward mid-gesture, a dark burst blossoming from his chest. His men ducked instinctively, looking around for a shooter above them, then below, then everywhere at once. Another crack. A radio operator with a long whip antenna slung over his back lurched, tumbling down a slope in a tangle of arms and cable. His radio skidded away, still attached to him by the strap, carving a thin line in the white crust until it vanished behind a rock. On the left, a machine gun that had been pouring rounds into Baker's position abruptly choked and went still. The gunner sagged forward, hands sliding off the grips. The assistant scrambled to pull him back, then flattened himself as a third shot shattered the rock in front of his face. "Somebody's hitting them," Ortiz breathed. "Sir, somebody's." "Find them," Cole said. He shifted, ignoring the protest from his ribs as he leaned higher. For a moment he saw nothing but glare and smoke. Then his gaze snagged on a shape on the far spur, across the pass. Just a smear of dark against white. Too low to be a standing man. Motionless except for a brief, precise movement as a long shape worked back and forth. Bolt, maybe. Tiny puffs of ice rose around it as the wind worried at the snow. "Got eyes on." Baker shouted. "There," Cole said, pointing. Opposite spur, just under the crest. One shooter. His mind did the rough math on distance and angle. Far. Too far for one of his guys who had broken off the main line. Too far forward for the Overwatch team's planned hide. It didn't match anything on the up order. Ortiz raised his monocular, adjusted focus with fingers that still shook a little. He was quiet for a long beat. Longer than made sense. "Talk to me," Cole said. Ortiz swallowed. "That's not one of ours." "You sure?" "Positive." A pause. Sir, it's a girl." Cole stayed at him. The words didn't fit the moment. Not with mortars falling and machine guns searching. "A kid," Ortiz stammered. "On the gun. She's on some kind of ledge. Looks small. I'd say 15. Another shot cracked out, followed by a distant shriek from the enemy side as a second machine gun fell silent. Over the platoon net, through the layers of warble and static, a voice finally punched through. Not the crisp tone of hire, but one of his own squad leaders, breath ragged, shouting over gunfire. "Whoever that is up there," the man rasped, "keep them alive." Cole's gaze stayed locked on the far spur. That dark shape lay prone in the wind, wrapped in a parka that looked too big, long rifle tucked tight into the pocket of a shoulder. No helmet, no plate carrier, just bone-deep stillness and unforgiving purpose. Another crack, another enemy body toppled, sliding down the slope like a broken toy. He had 100 questions and 0 time. Only one rose above the rest, nonsensical and raw. "Who are you?" The mountain answered only with echoes. Far above the chaos, the unseen shooter pulled the bolt again and settled into her cheek weld, the crosshairs already moving on. The story jumped away from that instant, backing out as if the world itself took a breath. The shriek of rounds and explosions faded. The view rose, up past the spur and the ridgelines, up where sound thinned and the mountains looked almost peaceful. From high above, the pass was just a pale scar between knife-edged peaks, shadows stretching long as the day slid toward night. Hours earlier, the snow lay untouched, the rocks unmarked by blasts or blood. The same valley, quiet, before everything went wrong. That morning, the base felt like a temporary mistake someone had glued onto the side of the mountain. Rows of tan berries squatted in the snow, their tops crusted with ice. Antennas stuck up in irregular lines, some tipped with frost, some wrapped in tape that flapped in the wind. A few low buildings huddled at the center, heat shimmering faintly above vents as generators thumped in the cold air. Inside the command shack, warm yellow light washed over a battered table spread with a map laminated so many times the edges had gone cloudy. The map showed the valley and surrounding ridges, blue grease pencil lines tracing routes and arcs, red circles marking historic attack points. Snow had changed everything, but terrain never really changed. It only hid. "This is our crossing," the intel officer said, tapping the narrow notch on the map with a gloved finger. "High pass here. Single pass suitable for a packed convoy in this weather. They'll have to use it if they want to move volume." Cole leaned in, breath fogging over the plastic. "And you're confident the courier's traveling today? Confident enough to send you up there?" The intel officer offered a tight smile. "We picked up chatter about a shipment coming into the valley. Dates match. Pattern of life at lower villages changed 2 days ago. Men gone, fewer women at the wells. Looks like they've moved people out of the way." The senior chief stood with his arms folded, jaw set under a gray stubble that made him look carved from the same rock as the mountains. Hunt spoke without taking his eyes off the map. "They've been trying to take something better than a pickup for months," he said. "Last stop they hit a convoy, they dragged off a broken radio like it was gold. Now they've had time to think. Don't be surprised if this isn't just about a courier. They want gear. They want one of ours on camera." Cole nodded. "What's on the drive?" "Targeting data," the intel officer said. "Routes. Support nodes. People like your fixer down there." He jerked his chin toward the doorway. Near the back wall, out of the way of the Americans' cold gear and loud voices, a man in a wool cap sat on a folding chair. His face was lined, his beard flecked with white. A faded scarf coiled around his neck. Karim, their local partner, their translator and negotiator and guide when maps failed. Beside him, wrapped in a parka one size too big, sat his daughter. She kept her hands shoved into the pockets, elbows tucked tight, trying to make herself smaller in the unfamiliar room. Dark hair escaped a knitted cap in wisps that clung to her cheeks. Her gaze, though, moved everywhere, over the map, the faces, the scribbled notes on a portable whiteboard. She drifted forward whenever someone asked about local routes or clan boundaries, just enough for her father to catch the nuance in her expression and adjust his own translation. Her name was Nazira. The operators mostly just thought of her as the kid who brought tea when they were trying to land local phrases. "Nazira, what's saddle again?" one of the newer guys had asked once, pointing to a map and drawing a shape with his hand. She'd replied without looking up from the dishes she was drying. "Gap between ridges. But the one you mean has a word closer to throat. It's narrow. Very narrow." Now she studied the satellite images hung beside the main map. Grainy monochrome shots showing the valley, taken over several days. Her eyes didn't follow the bold markings the intel officer had added. They tracked smaller things. On one print, a ridgeline looked too smooth in one section, a faint unnatural straightness breaking the usual chaotic pattern of rocks and wind-sculpted drifts. On another, the shadow of a supposed shepherd's hut lay wrong. Snow around it seemed untouched, yet paths from nearby hamlets did not lead toward it. She shifted, leaning close, eyes narrowing. Something felt off. While the Americans went back and forth over timing. Step off here, observation post there, extraction window here. Nazira bit the inside of her cheek, hesitating. She waited until the intel officer paused to flip a page in his folder, then moved to her father's side. She murmured quickly in their language, chin tipping toward the ridgeline on the photo. Karim glanced. "Tracks," he translated, to make sure he understood. She nodded. "Look here, that slope is always wiped clean by wind. But the snow is broken. Men sliding. They dug things." She tugged at his sleeve. "And the hut. Goats always pass huts. They do not pass this one." Karim's brows pulled together. He studied the images again, weighing his daughter's instinct against his own. Senior Chief Hunt was checking his watch, mentally counting back from the chopper's estimated time of return if weather worsened. He noticed a murmur and turned. "Karim," he said. "Something." Karim cleared his throat. "My daughter thinks there may be men on the high ridge, and that the hut is not as abandoned as old pictures say." Hunt leaned over the photo. From the distance of his world and experience, it looked like any other grainy winter shot. "We've run that route twice this month," he said. "No contact. Last drone picture from 2 days ago didn't show anything new. Probably just shepherds late in the season." Nazaro opened her mouth, then closed it when Hunt's attention slid away to the radio on the table. An operator keying in frequencies with practiced hands muttered something about cloud cover and line of sight. Hunt softened his tone without changing his mind. "We appreciate the caution. We'll keep eyes up, but we have a narrow window before that storm moves in. We can't scrub on maybe." He offered Karim a small nod meant to be reassuring and turned back to the mission specifics. Nazira stepped back again, the edge of her boot bumping the cane resting beside her father's chair. Old memories flickered behind her eyes. Winter hills where silence had felt thick as wool, and the sudden crack of rifles that had left uncles face down in new snow. Her father's hand found her shoulder, a grounding weight. Gear-up came next, a ritual that steadied everyone. Outside, in the cold yard between low buildings, operators stood by open cases and cleaned weapons. Fingers tightened straps and checked batteries. Magazines clicked into pouches. Glow sticks were taped to shoulder straps. A machine gunner looped his belt around his arm and gave it a tug, testing the feed. Men walked through their own private pre-combat checks, lips moving around remembered acronyms. Someone tossed Nazira a pair of thicker gloves as she passed, more practical than the thin pair she'd brought from home. She caught them without thinking, then realized the thrower was the platoon's marksman, a compact man with a quiet smile. "For the ridge," he said. "Gets cold fast." "I will be on the path," she replied. "Not up where you go." He grinned. "Sure, kid in the corner. Just keep your dad from talking too much." She glanced away, hiding a flicker of annoyance. He didn't know about the early mornings when her father had taken her up the smaller hills near their village, watching how mist clung to certain ravines, how wind curled around boulders, how he'd made her guess distances with nothing but her eyes, then check with an old rangefinder that only sometimes worked. On the motor pool line, the roar of a chopper arriving briefly drowned out every other sound. It came in low, rotors chopping the thin air, then settled to the snow with a flurry of white around it. Cole jogged out to the landing zone and ducked under the rotor disc, headset pressed tight as he spoke with the pilot. "Storm fronts moving in faster than forecast," the pilot shouted. "You get one daytime pickup. Latest at 1600, or we're punching out. No night extract in this soup." "Copy," Cole said. "We'll be ready." "Hope so." The pilot clapped him on the shoulder. "This valley eats people who cut it close." Nazira watched from beside the barriers as the chopper lifted again, banking away. The sound faded, replaced by the lower hum of generators and the clank of metal on metal as magazines were loaded. Over everything, the mountains loomed, indifferent. They stepped off just after dawn, boots squeaking on hard snow, their breath forming a line of ghosts that trailed behind them. Nazira walked a few steps behind the point man, just inside the arc of his awareness but outside his way. Karim walked at her side, a scarf wrapped high over his mouth. Their role was on the outer ring. Translate if they met villagers, advise on whether a path was safe, point out potential routes that maps did not show. Her eyes never stopped moving. She noticed a trio of birds circling above a slope that, by this time of year, should have been busy with goats. Their lazy spiral felt wrong to her. No herd below to stare insects, no movement to draw their curiosity. Just a swirl of wings above stillness. Near rock face, she found boot marks half filled with windblown snow. They were narrow, with a sharper heel than the broader local boots left. Foreign, she thought, or at least recently arrived from a town further away. Men who didn't grow up on these hills stepped heavier. "Tracks," she murmured. The point man glanced back. "From who?" She shrugged. "Someone in hurry. Maybe from the road. Maybe not." "Any fresh?" Senior Chief Hunt asked, scanning the slope as if he might spot the ghosts. "Not very," she said. "Storm covered much." "But," she frowned, "they go up, not across. No reason to go up there." Hunt squinted at the cliff above. "No reason for us either. Too steep." He checked his watch again. "Stay on plan. Eyes up." High on the opposite side of the valley, out of sight of the patrol, another group watched from the mouth of a shallow cave. Their commander knelt near the entrance, scarf pulled up over his nose, binoculars resting on a rock. The glass showed him small figures moving in disciplined intervals across the snow below. Guns up, heads on swivels. Well-trained. Beside him, a small radio scanner hissed and chirped, picking up a pattern of transmissions. He had listened to that pattern for weeks, logging timing and content with the patience of someone who understood that knowing the rhythm of an opponent meant knowing the openings. They came exactly when we thought, he said quietly to the man at his elbow. Same route, same hour, same request for birds. They are sure of their own habits. His adjunct smirked. Today we borrow them. They had buried wires in the snow days ago, marking out a rough square where explosives could be triggered with a simple click. They had zeroed in mortars on natural choke points, walking rounds until rocks they chose as reference shattered. They had rehearsed fields of fire in the dark, calling arcs from memory. The commander looked over his shoulder at the crate pushed deeper into the cave's shade. Inside, wrapped and padded, lay components that would be worth more than gold if they could put them to use, jamming gear taken from older battlefields, modified with help from men who knew more about circuits than old rifles. Enough to cause trouble, if used right. More important than the hardware was what he planned to win with it. A captured radio with intact codes. A helmet camera he could use to stage his own version of events. A foreign soldier kneeling in the snow for the world to see. Back in the valley, Nazar's gaze snagged on a thread of nothing cutting up the cliff ahead. A path, if one knew where to look. Barely more than the width of a boot in some places, lost beneath wind drift in others. An animal trail from years back, before air raids and roadblocks had changed the way her people moved through their own land. Her mind traced it upward. It zigzagged along the face, then vanished near a shelf just below the crest. From there, one might see the whole basin. She turned her head toward it, marking rocks and twisted trees as reference points. The others kept moving, following their planned route toward the saddle and the hut, unaware of the one line in the mountain that did not appear on any map. The saddle looked different up close. From the map table back on base, it had been lines and numbers. From the drone images, it had been shades of gray and white. On the ground, it was harsh brightness and hard air, wind cutting through layers like they were nothing. The platoon spread out as they approached, spacing themselves the way they had done on countless training ranges. The Overwatch element peeled off toward a cluster of darker rocks on one side to set up an observation post. The main body angled toward the shepherd's hut near the center of the pass, a squat shape half buried in snow. Karim and Nazira drifted toward the rear, behind the last fire team. They had been told, clearly, to stay low when the Americans moved to cover positions. Their job through the saddle was mostly to stay out of the way and watch for any villagers who might wander into danger. Nazira's boots told her things the map hadn't. The snow here did not feel like fresh powder. In certain channels, it was compacted as if men had slid down there deliberately, carving invisible chutes. In other spots, it held a strange layered crunch, like someone had walked there days before and then the weather had tried and failed to erase it. She frowned and bent, brushing aside loose crystals with a gloved hand. A thin strand of disturbed powder crossed their path, an almost straight scar where something long and heavy had been dragged under the surface. A cable, she thought suddenly. Or wire. Baba, she hissed. Look. Karim crouched beside her. His eyes, once quick to read signs like this, took longer now. He followed the faint line up the slope. It disappeared beneath a drift near flat rock. Before he could call out, the mountain roared. The blast tore open the ground 20 meters ahead, a geyser of snow and dirt and stone. Two operators were lifted into the air, bodies twisting awkwardly before they crashed down, gear scattering. Shouts erupted, half training, half fear. Contact front! Contact front! Someone screamed. Machine guns answered. The sound came from both sides at once, long cutting bursts from above. Traces carved lines across the saddle, bright streaks that made the air look like it had wire running through it. Men dove for whatever cover they could find, low mounds, broken stone, the dips left by old snowmelt. Nazareth hit the ground hard, breath knocked out of her. She felt more than heard her father's grunt beside her as he grabbed her shoulders and tried to drag her behind a small outcrop. Cole's world shrank to angles and arcs. Alpha, orient high left. Bravo, high right, he shouted, trusting that his men would know where he meant. Smoke out. Get off the X. They threw smoke, gray clouds blossoming and drifting. For a moment it helped. Then rounds began to slice through, the traces turning the haze into an illuminated web. The lieutenant reached for his radio. Thunder. This is Viper Actual. Troops in contact. Grid. Static. Nothing but static, overlaid with that low, ugly hum. Try the backup, he shouted toward the comm specialist. The specialist pulled a second handset from his chest rig, flipped to a different frequency, keyed it. Thunder. Thunder. This is Viper Bravo. Break. We are. His voice cut off as the handset shrieked and then went dead. So, he yelled, ducking as a round chipped the rock near his head. I'm getting a wideband noise across every channel. Sats out. Short range too. They are running some kind of jammer. Of course they were. Cole could feel the trap around them now. Not just in lead but in silence. No higher. No birds on call. Just them in the bowl. On the left, the platoon's marksman settled behind his rifle, barrel pointing toward one of the machine gun positions. He had seconds to acquire, aim, and fire before the enemy adjusted again. He did everything right. Body aligned, breath slow, finger taking up slack. As he closed one eye, a faint glint from an opposite spur winked like a star in daylight. The shot that hit him came from somewhere above them, not from their own lines. He jerked back, rifle clattering from his hands. A dark stain spread across his chest rig. He rolled once and lay still, eyes open against the bright sky. Sniper, someone shouted. They've got a shooter up top. Nazareth's heart kicked. Not just guns and bombs. They had placed a skilled shooter opposite the American zone. Someone had done real thinking about this. Mortar rounds started to land again. Closer, more measured now. One fell behind the platoon, near the route they had come up, blasting rock and carving a new hollow into the slope. Another slammed near the shepherd's hut, splintering its shabby door, sending splinters and snow in all directions. They are boxing us, she thought, not like a child but like someone who had watched men plan snares for wolves. One of the older operators, a man with a scar over one eye and a way of moving that always made space for others, took shrapnel in his side. He collapsed with a sharp curse. Doc lunged toward him, kit already in hand, but rounds snapped inches from his boots. We need to move. Cole shouted, eyes burning from smoke and snow. Where? Baker yelled back. Left is covered, right is covered, back is getting shelled. Forward, Cole said, because any direction was better than lying still under a sighted-in gun. We pushed through that hut. He picked his moment and sent a squad forward. They rose into a sprint, legs pumping, packs bouncing. The second machine gun nest waited for that. It unleashed a flood of rounds from another angle, catching the sprinting men in a crossfire. One went down, a spray of snow marking his landing. The rest dove, scraping knees and knuckles as they crashed behind a low fold in the ground that offered only the most grudging cover. Pinned, someone shouted. We're pinned in the open. Nazareth pressed herself against the rock beside Kareem, mind racing past Faye. Through gaps between stones, she saw enemy fighters in dark coats moving with purpose toward a point beyond the shattered hut. They carried bulky cases between them, working in pairs. Not chasing scattered Americans. Not in a rush to press the ambush. Moving toward something behind the visible fight. Not just to kill, she realized. To take. The fallen marksman lay several meters away, half hidden by snow kicked up by repeated impacts. His rifle rested knee-high, lodged in a drift, barrel protruding. Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The sound of the fight faded at the edges as her focus narrowed. That gun, that overlook, that narrow path she'd memorized without knowing why. She crawled. Kareem grabbed for her sleeve. Nazareth. They need someone who can see them, she said, the words pushing out tight. They cannot see the ridge. They cannot touch the guns. It is not your fight, he hissed. But it was. It had been the moment men came to their village with trucks and promises and left bodies in the snow when the promises went bad. It had been when her father, bandaged and quiet, had taken her to hills at dawn and said, "If you know where danger comes from, it is harder for it to surprise you." Another mortar landed close, showering them with icy grit. The brief lull in gunfire after the blast gave her a slim window. She rolled away from her father's grasp and took the chance. "Stop her!" a rear security operator yelled, reaching for her. She slipped under his arm, small size working in her favor. Snow burned cold under her palms as she scrambled toward the marksman's body. Rounds cracked overhead. One chipped the rock she had just used as cover, spraying stone dust across her back. She reached the rifle and grabbed it by the stock, feeling the weight settle along her arm. The optic was familiar. Her father had shown her one like it once, explaining how to keep both eyes open so the world didn't shrink too much. "Kid," the rear security operator called. "You can't." "Can you?" she shot back, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. He looked toward the ridgeline, looked down at his own weapon, suited for closer work, looked back at the boiling chaos in the saddle. Comms were dead, Overwatch silenced, escape routes being erased one by one. He didn't answer, and in that silence she found all the permission she needed. Cradling the rifle close, she slid behind a rock and began moving laterally, angling toward the cliff face she had traced earlier in her mind. Each step took her closer to the edge of what anyone had planned and deeper into a path only she had noticed. Her father's voice followed her, low and hoarse and afraid, but the wind took it before she could turn back. The goat path was waiting, thin as a dare. She put her boot on the first ledge and started to climb. The air changed with height. Down in the bowl, sound and fury rolled back and forth like surf, shouts, blasts, the stuttering snarl of machine guns. Up here, 20 meters above the main fight, the noise still came, but muffled, filtered by distance and stone. Nazara's boots scratched at ice under a thin crust of snow. She kept her body close to the rock, chest and ribs scraping as she moved. The rifle strapped across her back knocked against the cliff with each shift. She winced every time metal touched stone. The path narrowed quickly. In one spot, it was barely wider than the length of her foot. A careless step would send loose snow and pebbles skittering into the void and probably bring her with them. She pressed herself flat, palms spread against the rough surface, skin burning where cold cut through worn gloves. At a bend, the rock above her jutting out at a sharp angle, she found old scars carved into the stone. Small divots, evenly spaced, like the marks left by someone who had once climbed here with more gear than she had. Crampons or iron spikes, maybe from hunters long gone or smugglers who had used this way before roads and checkpoints changed the economy. She remembered being smaller, following her father on the lower slopes, testing each foothold, listening to him explain how some paths were not on maps because they belonged to those who lived there, not those who drew lines. "Always know a way up that others forget," he had said, pausing to let her catch her breath. Height sees. Height chooses. A shot rang out below, louder, closer. She flinched. A splinter of rock to her right exploded, sending fragments against her cheek. She tasted grit. The enemy counter-sniper was still searching. From his vantage, any movement along the edges of the bowl would look suspect, anything out of pattern. He didn't know who she was or what she carried. He only knew someone had started picking off his side, and the hunting ground had changed. Nazara froze. Pieces of ice slid off the ledge and dropped out of sight. She pressed her face into the cold rock and stayed very, very still, counting slowly in her head. Her lungs burned. Her shoulders shook. When nothing else struck near her after several counts, she inched forward again. Around the bulge in the cliff, a small hollow opened up just below the ridgeline. It was the kind of place wind carved over years, scouring out just enough stone to make a lie-flat dent. You wouldn't see it from far away. Up close, it felt like an alcove made for someone who knew it existed. She eased herself into it, turning so her back pressed into the curve. From here, the world widened. The basin rolled out below, the platoon scattered along its length, tiny figures behind rocks and in shallow dips. The shepherd's hut sat crooked at the center. Half its roof collapsed from a recent blast. Smoke from shattered walls drifted upward and flattened in the cold air. Beyond the immediate chaos, she could see more. On the far left spur, the enemy's counter-sniper hide was now obvious. A line of snow had been hacked into a clean slit, just wide enough for a rifle muzzle and an eye. A faint wisp of vapor betrayed the shooter's breath, a ghost lace in the frigid air. Clusters of men moved along the ridges, dark shapes darting between stones. 2 machine gun teams, one on each side, raked the valley in overlapping arcs. Near the mouth of the pass, a crew worked around a squat piece of gear mounted on a tripod and connected by cables to a generator and a tall mast that carried a narrow antenna. She didn't need someone to whisper what that was. The rifle she held felt heavier now. She set it down gently, muzzle pointed safe, and checked it the way she had seen the marksman do earlier. Bolt, chamber, magazine. The metal was cold enough to bite through her gloves. She brought the optic to her eye. The first thing she noticed was the flaw. A hairline crack ran across one lens, distorting the image slightly when she adjusted magnification. The glass must have taken a knock when the marksman fell. At lower power, it was manageable. At higher, it blurred the edges and added a faint phantom line when none existed. Of course, she muttered, not in anger but in a grim recognition that nothing in this fight was going to be simple. She checked the magazine, less than 10 rounds seated. A spare mag she had yanked from the marksman's rig held another 10, maybe a few more. 20 shots, give or take, between her and an enemy that outnumbered her side on every crest. Below, the platoon's gunfire was thinning. The rhythm of their shooting had changed, becoming more cautious, more spread out. Men under heavy fire always started with too much trigger. Then the reality of ammunition limits brought them back to shorter bursts. She lifted her eye to the scope again. Wind poured at the ridge, wrapping around her like a moving hand. It carried snow with it in fine sheets, creating thin veils that appeared and vanished in seconds. Targets sharpened, then softened as those veils passed. She would have to time shots between those keratins. Farther down the valley, past the enemy positions, she saw a cluster of small stone huts. Smoke from cooking fires curled from a few, then died as the sound of battle rolled across. Small figures darted between doorways, seeking shelter. Civilians, caught as always in someone else's plan. Some of her potential lines of fire, she realized with a twist in her gut, would run close to those houses. A round that went clean through a man or skipped off stone at the wrong angle could carry beyond the fight. She inhaled, slow, drawing cold air deep into her lungs, feeling each rib. Her heart hammered so hard it seemed to shake her arms. Natural point of aim, she whispered in her own tongue, the words a steadying chant. Relax into the ground. Let the rifle settle where it wants. Then move your body, not the gun. Her father's voice layered over her own in memory, deep and patient. Don't fight the shot. Make the shot where your body is honest. Count the breaths. On the pause, squeeze. Never snatch. Below, a man screamed in pain and someone shouted for document. She forced herself not to look down. Not yet. The valley was all need and urgency. But up here she needed something else. Stillness in the middle of it all. A flash of nostalgia came, sharp as ice. A younger version of herself kneeling on a hillside above their village, snowflakes catching in her hair. Her father pointing at a distant tree. How far? He had asked. 300, she had guessed, cheeks numb. He had smiled and handed her the old rangefinder that only worked when it wanted to. She had pressed the button and waited for the faint green numbers. 325. Close enough. Your eyes are better than this old thing, he had said. Use them. The gadget breaks. The frost ruins batteries. Your eyes don't run out. Now, she used those lessons. That rock outcropping near the enemy sniper, the one the snow curled around in a particular pattern, she pegged it at roughly 600. The wedge of cliff behind it gave her vertical reference. The height of the men in her scope allowed finer judgment. She had no fancy calculator, no unfolding arm board with pre-written dope. Just rangy she had learned to read and when she had learned to feel along the skin of her face. Through the optic, the world narrowed to a circle. Inside that circle, the enemy sniper waited. He was patient. He didn't fire in long streaks. He took his time. He shifted his rifle between targets with the smooth economy of someone who had practiced this more than once. That made him dangerous and also predictable. First, the eyes, she whispered. Always the eyes. She settled into the shallow hollow, adjusted her grip, let the rifle rest against her shoulder. The crosshairs drifted slightly with each heartbeat. She waited, counting them, letting the settle become less wild, her body finding a groove in the stone. Wind brushed her cheek. She watched a flag of snow curling off a rock near the sniper's hide, gauging direction and force. Her father had always told her that snow and smoke spoke clearer than any weather report. Down in the pass, a mortar round hit close enough that she felt the faint tremor through stone. She ignored it. When the crosshairs reached the point she had chosen, a spot just below where his scope met his brow, she let the last breath out and pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The shot cracked, sharp and cold, rolling across the valley. The counter-sniper's hide went still. She worked the bolt by feel, eyes still on the target, waiting for any sign of movement. There was none. The breath vapor ghost she had been watching no longer threaded through the slit. A dark line on the snow beneath the shooting slot widened slowly. One, she counted softly. Her hands trembled. She tightened her grip until they steadied. There were more to take. Machine guns, teams with rockets, men with radios, someone at that jamming gear. She had only so many rounds and only so much time before someone realized the mountain had betrayed them. She would have to choose who vanished from the fight and in what order. Below, the ambush still raged. Men shouted, guns answered, mortars dropped in their steady, methodical rain. Up here, for the first time since the patrol walked into the pass, the fight belonged to her. She slid the crosshairs toward the nearest machine gun nest and began to climb her own quiet ladder through the enemy's plans. By the time the chopper came, the valley was a blur of smoke and wind-torn snow. From Nazira's hollow, the inbound bird looked small at first, a dark cross against the bright sky. Its rotors cut lines in the air, blowing loose snow into a rising halo as it descended. Door guns flashed, spitting short bursts at any muzzle flashes still daring to appear along the ridgeline. On the ground, the survivors of the platoon moved with a terrible, efficient urgency. They carried their wounded in firemen's carries and on improvised sleds made from tops and poles. Men who had been pinned for what felt like hours now sprinted, legs sluggish and burning, lungs howling in freezing air. The enemy's fire, once a coordinated storm, had degraded into scattered anger. Some fighters ran, sliding and stumbling over their own prepared positions. Others shot from the hip, unfocused, leaderless. Nazira watched it all with the empty click of a dry trigger under her finger. She had fired her last round moments earlier, dropping a man who had tried to aim a launcher at the chopper's belly. The recoil still tingled in her shoulder, the echo of the shot still bouncing between the peaks in her mind. Now she lay flat in the hollow, pressing herself into the rock as return fire ripped into the ledge she had just vacated. They had found where she had been, late, but with enough rage to chew the ridge apart. Chips of stone rained down around her, some striking her back with sharp little taps. She tucked her chin and listened to the thump of rotors, the rising whine as the chopper took on weight and strained to lift. Through a gap in the stone, she saw men grab the skid and haul themselves in, saw another man shove a stretcher toward the open door, and never leaving the casualty's shoulder until someone inside grabbed him and pulled him in. Then the bird pulled away, climbing, nose-dipping as it built speed down the valley. Snow and exhaust blasted across the saddle, erasing footprints and covering spent casings. For a moment, the sound swallowed everything. When the echo faded, all that remained was gun smoke and the thin, sharp taste of cold. Nazira stayed where she was, alone with a spent rifle and hands that would not stop shaking. Far below, the enemy who still lived dragged their commander's body from where he had fallen, their shouts disjointed now, their plans shattered. The jammer lay crooked, cables severed, the makeshift mast bent. The cases they had been moving toward the back of the killing ground lay open and scattered, their chance at an easy prize lost. The valley that was meant to be a stage for their triumph had turned into a wound in the mountain instead. Nazira closed her eyes. Her father had once told her that some choices made in winter never thaw, that the lines you crossed in snow would still be there in your heart when spring came. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a girl who had changed something she could never take back. The wind came again, stronger this time, wiping away the last distinct tracks on the ridge. She gathered herself, slung the empty rifle, and began the long, careful climb down, following her own prints into a new version of her life. Night found the base wrapped in quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful. Floodlights cast hard-edged pools of brightness onto the snow, turning footprints into dark impressions that zigzagged between buildings. The distant mountains faded into flat silhouettes against a sky pricked with stars. In the aid station, the air smelled of disinfectant and sweat and a faint metallic tang that never quite left places where wounds were treated. Operators lay on cots under thin blankets, some awake and staring, some asleep with the slackness of the exhausted, some turned on their sides toward the wall. One bed had a sheet pulled over the form beneath it. No one looked at it directly for long. Doc moved between patients in a slow orbit, checking vitals, adjusting drips, muttering reassurances. His own face looked years older than it had that morning. Outside the operations room, Cole paused with his hand on the doorframe. He took one breath, two, then went in. Inside, the room hummed with a different kind of activity. Screens showed frozen frames from helmet cameras. Someone had paused the feed on one view that captured a distant, tiny figure on a ridge, wrapped in cloth and lying prone beside a rifle. Another screen showed a plotted map of the valley, updated with what they now knew about enemy positions. Senior Chief Hunt stood with his fist braced on the table, knuckles white. "Run that sequence again," he said. The intel specialist tapped keys. The video rewound a few minutes and then started forward again. The camera's perspective was jittery, attached to a man who had been hugging a rock for his life. Over the gun smoke and snow swirl, a far-off muzzle flash winked on the opposite spur. A fraction of a second later, one of the machine guns that had been pinning them went quiet. "That," Cole said, pointing. "Back it up. Freeze on that frame." The tech did. The image blurred when magnified, but they could see enough. A small body. A parka. No body armor silhouette. The shape of a long rifle clutched with practiced familiarity. "Kareem's kid," Hunt said quietly. It wasn't a question. Cole exhaled. She had the only angle. Marksman was down. Comms jammed. Someone stepped into the gap. Hunt rubbed his face. She shouldn't have had to. No, Cole agreed. But if she hadn't, we'd have more sheets in that aid station. On another table, laid out among stray headsets and notebooks, were items recovered by a follow-on force that had swept the battlefield after the fight. A rugged tablet with a cracked screen, printed pages in plastic sleeves, components of the jammer, now powered down and safely inert. The intel officer flipped through the pages, pausing to translate headings. "They've been studying us," he said. "Not just us, any foreign patrol that uses this valley. Times, routes, extraction spots. They mapped your habits. Then they built their trap around those predictions." He tapped the tablet. "This has lists of things they wanted to capture. Radios with certain serial series. Camera mounts. Laptops. A live prisoner from a special unit, specifically. They were going to turn this into a broadcast. Show that they could take your people, your gear, your secrets, right in what you thought was your backyard." Hunt's mouth twisted. "And now we have their plan instead," the intel officer said. "And they've lost not just men and equipment, but the myth they were trying to build." Cole looked at the paused frame of the girl on the ridge. "They still got their symbol," he said softly, "just not the one they wanted." Later, in a corner of the yard where the floodlights only half reached, Nazira sat on a crate with a blanket over her shoulders. The night air bit at any skin not covered, but after the day she'd had, she hardly noticed. Her hands were still stained in places with oil and powder that washing hadn't fully removed. Tiny flecks of stone dust clung stubbornly to the back of one knuckle. She stared at them, fingers curled loosely, as if they belonged to someone else. Boot steps crunched in the snow. She looked up as Senior Chief Hunt approached, a shape cut from shadow and light. He stopped a meter away, as if unsure of how close to get to a girl who had done what she had done. In his hands he carried something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, as if revealing something fragile. Inside lay the now empty rifle. Beside it, on the folded cloth, sat a worn patch, faded, edges frayed, from her father's old uniform, kept in a drawer at the base since the day he had stopped working patrols. "We cleaned it," Hunt said, nodding at the rifle. "Figured you'd want it to go back with you. As for this," he touched the patch with a thumb. "He left it here, said it brought bad luck. I never got the feeling you agreed with him." Nazira blinked hard. "He said it was heavy," she replied. "Not unlucky. Just heavy." "Yeah," Hunt said. "That, I get." He held the patch out. She took it carefully, feeling the rough weave under her fingers. For a moment, neither spoke. The bass hummed around them with the low sounds of men trying to return to routines they might never fully trust again. "How long was he teaching you?" Hunt asked at last. She thought back. Snow on the hills. Lines of birds over the valley. The smell of gun oil in their small house when he had disassembled the old rifle on the kitchen table and shown her how to lay each part out in order. "Since I was smaller than the gun was long," she said. "After men came to our village and promised jobs and money and instead took cousins for videos. He said if we could see danger before it arrived, we might have choices." He nodded, eyes on the ground. "He was a soldier before," she added. "Different war. Same mountains. He did not want me to pick up his ghosts, but he wanted me to survive them." Hunt let that sit between them. "You did more than survive today," he said finally. She flinched, just a little. "I did not want to collect bodies, only to stop them from taking more." "Sometimes those are the same thing," he said, voice grim. "Doesn't make it easier to sleep after." From the operations room, Cole stepped out, caught sight of them, and walked over. He stopped beside Hunt, boots creaking on the packed snow. "On behalf of my platoon," he said, each word careful, "thank you. We came back because of what you did." Nazira pulled the blanket tighter. Praise felt strange after a day like this. "You came back because you listened," she replied quietly. "When someone said, 'Move now,' you moved. When someone said, 'Get to the bed,' you did. I was just—" she struggled for the word. "One more piece." Cole gave a small, humorless huff. "Some piece." Hunt shot him a look that said enough. Cole closed his mouth on anything else he might have said. There were things they could not give her. A childhood without today, a memory without images of men dropping in scope view. But they could at least offer recognition. "You shouldn't have had to be up there," Cole said instead. "But you why? That doesn't mean we'll ever think of you as just the kid in the corner again." Her mouth tilted. Not quite a smile. Something more tired. "I was never just that," she said. "You just did not see it." He accepted the rebuke with a nod. "You're right." They left her there after a time, sensing she needed space more than more words. The base went on around her, ground crew checking fuel levels, cooks cleaning pots, guards stamping their feet on the perimeter. When the horizon began to pale, she slid off the crate and walked toward the edge of the compound. Beyond the last row of berries, the land dropped away in a slow slope toward the valley. From here, she could not see the exact ledge where she had lain, nor the crater where the first blast had thrown men into the air. But she could see the line of peaks framing the place. They looked unchanged, as mountains always did, old and unmoved by what humans did in their shadows. She had no rifle with her now. That had gone back into a case, its metal cleaned and oiled, its optics checked. It would be used again, by hands more trained, in circumstances designed rather than forced. What she carried instead was a pair of binoculars, light against her chest. She lifted them and scanned the ridges, not because she expected an attack that instant, but because looking had become part of who she was. She saw fresh snow smoothing over old scars. She saw birds beginning to move again over slopes that had been too loud yesterday. She saw the faint, nearly invisible trace of a path along a cliff face, already fading. Behind her, voices murmured. Someone laughed, the sound edged but genuine. A new day had begun whether they were ready for it or not. The narrator in her mind, the quiet part that had been watching even when she was in the scope, framed one last thought, something that felt like it belonged to the valley as much as to her. This place had been drawn to be a grave. It had taken 12 men and more to keep that ink from drying. 12 enemies in the snow. 12 rounds that had not missed. One girl who would carry them all, not in her hands, which had finally stopped shaking, but in the places that would make future choices heavier. She lowered the binoculars and let the mountain wind wash over her.